that brings us into what are normal habits, and you have all this written down for you, but normal habits, I'm going to say every 3 to 4 hours, that is normal, which winds up to be about 7 to 9 times in a day. 1 time at night is okay. A strong stream. Women come and tell me I just drip a little bit, and then I wait, then maybe I drip a little bit more. You know, it's just not a strong stream. You want a nice flow. And I'm going to tell you that if you getting into the habit of every 3 hours, let's say 3 hours going, every 3 hours, you have enough that when your bladder just contracts, because you're sitting on the commode, right? When you contract, your stream should be strong enough to a count of 8 Mississippi. 8 seconds. I know you're all going to do that, right? Next time you got that, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3. You're going to count to about 8 Mississippi, right?
You can spell it.
What?
You can spell it.
You can spell it, right. So and that means you've stored, and you have about 8 Mississippi worth of voiding. That's good. Because if you're just used to having your bladder fill a little bit, maybe 4, 6 ounces, I gotta go. And then when you void, it might be a 3 Mississippi. It never had a chance to really fill. So we're talking about what is normal. And I don't care how old you are, how young you are, whatever. That's what's normal for a bladder, and that's what you want to aim for. Okay, sitting on the toilet. You know, I have women who will never ever in a public place sit down on the toilet. Well, that's what the tissue paper's for. That's what you try to do is you have to sit. And the only time you can hover is at a Jiffy John, or even worse, the airplane commode. You know, that's really a bad place. Anyway, you know, that's the only time. But you don't make it a habit of hovering, or if you're in a foreign country, right? You're sometimes like that. But the hovering means that your pelvic floor muscles are not relaxed at all. And if they're not relaxed, you have to push the urine out, and it just doesn't flow. It just doesn't flow really well because the floor is tight. The urethra comes right through your pelvic floor. And if you're not relaxed, it cuts it off like a kink in a garden hose. And then you sit there and you think, well, I think there's more. And then you try again, and you just cannot relax your pelvic floor to let it go out, to let the urine out. Straining, you don't want straining. You don't want to. Some women I know, they're in a hurry. They're in a hurry to get to the bathroom and get it out. Straining is not good because that puts pressure. When you strain, bear down, puts pressure on your pelvic floor. It's already weak. And then the added intra-abdominal pressure makes it worse over time. So you just sit down, relax your floor, and let it go, hopefully to an 8 Mississippi count. Drinking 6 to 8 glasses of water. That's been the standard, the norm for I can't tell you how many years, but it really actually is what you should be taking on a daily basis is in ounces, half your body weight. So if you're 150 pounds, you should be drinking 75 ounces of water a day. And then people say, well, if I did that, I'm in the bathroom all the time. But that is a goal. It's not as if tomorrow you start drinking 75 ounces. You increase it a little bit more a day. I have lots of women coming in that just, I ask them to do a bladder diary, and I see they're only drinking maybe 40 ounces because in their minds, I don't want to have to go to the bathroom so much. But the whole thing is normalizing. You know, we need the fluids. We need to retrain this to store more, up to 3 hours, and then you go. And it's a gradual process to retrain your bladder to hold that much. So if you are thinking you need 75 ounces a day. You start in the morning, and by the end of your day, say 7 o'clock at night, you have gone through 75 ounces of water. You'll be surprised. It just doesn't take, it's not all that much at all. But this is the newer rule of thumb. Now, if you drink teas and caffeine, chocolate, if you eat those things, they are irritants that can make your bladder go more frequently. So as I said before, you look at your list on bladder irritants and what is it that you might be indulging in, and you might stop that, up the water, and then we're going to talk about retraining your floor to handle all that. Really good combination. So what are abnormal habits? Well, we just said voiding more often than every 2 hours, getting up at night. My favorite, going just in case. You don't even have the urge to go, but you know you're going out, you don't know where the bathrooms are, you might as well empty your bladder before you go. And that's a habit that we have to stop. We have to stop. And because it's reprogramming this little guy, right? You have to stop that. Not drinking enough water, you're straining, hovering. Sometimes we're avoiding and then having to void again in a few minutes, or the flow of the stream stops. Weak stream, that all has to do with the how well you have an intact floor. These muscles that are letting the urine through in the first place. Okay? So I gave you handouts in there about normal habits and abnormal habits. It's in your handout. We have the bladder irritants and for urge control, I like to work with patients first on finding your pelvic floor, strengthen it. And then a couple weeks into the strengthening, then you work on techniques to work with that urgency or that frequency to control the bladder. But you've got to have the muscle tissue first in order to work with the techniques of the urgency. But I did include this for you, how to stop an urge. But I'm going to ask you to work with me first on finding your pelvic floor and what that feels like. And we will do that. All right. Now, the other issue with a lot of people is stress incontinence. Coughing, sneezing. I gave you a whole list of things. Sometimes blowing your nose, going up and down steps, lifting something, maybe even a grandchild, squatting, bending over to get the clothes out of the dryer, sometimes turning in bed if it's really, really, really an issue. So, this is all stress incontinence. And what that means specifically is the pelvic floor, these guys right here, are not strong enough to handle the intra-abdominal pressure coming down on top of it that's created by lifting something or sneezing or coughing. That's a huge ballistic force when you sneeze or you cough. Maybe you've had bronchitis or a bad cold, and then you're coughing a lot, and then you notice that little leak that happens when you cough. These guys aren't strong enough to counterbalance that force that comes down. That's pretty much what it is. So what you do is you're going to be strengthening your floor so that it can handle that force of a cough or a sneeze or lifting the baby or whatever that increases your abdominal pressure. The pelvic floor can handle that effort. All right? So that's what they mean by stress incontinence. And I have a lot of women that have both. They have the stress incontinence, and then they have the urgency as well. Maybe some urgency when the urge gets really strong. Oh, I can't make it to the bathroom, and they leak. Do you know about the key in the door syndrome? Yeah. When you get out of the car, okay, I'm okay, and then you put the key in the door, and your bladder knows it. It just knows you have the key in the door. It's a trigger, and it becomes... Why? It just becomes that trigger, and then you try, and some of us don't even get the slacks down fast enough before it actually, There can be a deluge or there can be just a little bit. It's one of those triggers. Like, it just gets into our psyche, it gets into our brain that's associated with having to go to the bathroom. There's other kinds of incontinence, just like functional incontinence, which some of our ladies in the nursing home, it's just that, nobody takes them to the bathroom often enough, so what are they going to do? They can't go by themselves. Functional means they can't walk themselves to the bathroom, and then they're wet. They're sitting in their diapers. They're wet. That's a functional incontinence. And then there's an overflow incontinence, that the bladder gets over distended, and then it doesn't contract well because the muscle's stretched out. Leaks, dribble, 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 dribble. That's another issue as well. I'm not even going to talk about a neurogenic bladder because that's associated with neurological diseases like Parkinson's and multiple sclerosis and having a stroke. That's a whole other problem. There's a whole other approach with that. So it doesn't have, urinary incontinence does not have to be a normal part of aging. And that's what I would like you to know, is that incontinence, this frequency, is not a normal part of aging, and you can do something about it, right? No matter what anybody else says. Okay, we're going to go into talking specifically now about what to do, what your pelvic floor is, and I'm just going to introduce you to that. The pelvic floor is a group of muscles that are in the very base of you. This is my pelvis model. Back here, this is your ilium, this is your sacrum, this is your lumbar, the fifth lumbar vertebrae. Have you heard about your sacroiliac joints? I call them your SI, where your ilium and your sacrum come together. That's referred to as your sacroiliac joint. Now, your sacrum is designed to go up and down, side to side. It's supposed to move, right? So do your ilium. We have to sit on one hip or we turn around. Everything is designed to move. About an inch behind your pubic symphysis sits your bladder, right back here. And so it's right in the middle of something I call crosstalk. There's a lot of neurological crosstalk. This way, ligaments, muscles, tendons, organs. There's so many things in this just one little arena where there's a lot going on. So your little bladder is at the mercy of all this stuff going on. It's like my analogy with, if you ever look at a baby's nursery and all the babies are crying, and then this one baby doesn't have anything to cry about, but he hears all the crying, so he's going to cry too. He doesn't know what else is going on. It's the same sort of thing here with the crosstalk. And the pressures that are created have an effect on the bladder itself. Okay? It's susceptible. Pelvic floor are these guys right here. Your tailbone comes right down in the middle of your pelvic floor. If you've ever broken your tailbone or fell on the ice years before, or even had a very bad rear-ending car accident, then your tailbone can be affected. The tailbone is supposed to go up and down. It can go side to side. It's supposed to move. It has to move when you've got a lot of stool coming through your colon. It has to move. Now let's just say you have really, really weak pelvic floor muscles. This is what this is. Then it's going to also affect the ability of stool passing through your colon. And let's say you're on medications that slow down the transit time anyway, then we can have the constipation. Now, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. This is the pelvic floor model. This is your pelvic floor muscles. This is your little tailbone coming down right through here. That's your anal opening. Vaginal opening is here. Urethral opening is here. There's three layers here. If you've ever heard about the levator ani muscle group, that's what this is. But there's different muscles within the levator ani, and I specifically work on those individual layers because I want everything to be picture perfect. I want everything to work. You can be thinking you're strengthening your pelvic floor, but you're really tightening your glutes, like no, or you're tightening your abs, or maybe your inner thigh muscles, but you're not getting these guys per se. Only somewhat are they being activated. But if they've been weak because there's been babies and because there's hormonal changes and because you've had abdominal surgery, maybe gallbladder out or whatever, your system has changed. And then, like I said, these are very highly estrogen dependent and magnesium dependent. We have to have enough magnesium, but that's the kind of thing you talk about with your primary care, your gynecologist. But that's what these are, right? This is your pelvic floor muscles. Very, very important to help with the urgency, the frequency, and the stress incontinence. This is where you start. One of the other issues with a weaker pelvic floor can be something, aside from the incontinence, it can be a prolapse. Do you know what a prolapse is, most of you? It just means that the organ is starting to descend. And if you still have a uterus, it can start to descend. Sometimes a bladder will start to descend because it doesn't have a floor to lift it up, to keep it up there. The floor is weaker. And our uterus and our bladder have ligaments. What holds them in place? It's ligaments attached to the peritoneum, right? And so over time, because of all the trauma we've been through and our hormonal changes and orthopedic injuries, maybe a long history of hip pain, those things, those can be changes within that whole pelvic arena. So what can happen is, well, this picture says it pretty good. This is a firm pelvic floor muscle. The black thing is your uterus, okay? The yellow one is your bladder. The pink is the pelvic floor. It's supposed to support all these guys. And then when you don't have that support, you have a prolapse, meaning they come down, they descend. Sometimes to the point, you're making a face, sometimes to the point where the uterus actually comes outside of the vaginal opening. All right? So our gynecologist friends want to go in there and do surgery and take out your uterus because it's not right there. There's so many things that can happen. The prolapses in your bladder too, it's called a cystocele. And that's when it just descends. And lots of women have gone in for bladder suspension surgeries. And what they do is they'll take, the ligaments I just talked about that hold up the bladder, it will just lift it, put it back in place. I can tell you, your bladder does not like it when it's not in its own good place. It starts to perform poorly when it's starting to descend. So women will go and have the suspension surgery, and in a lot of cases it does help for a certain length of time because we still have our own hormonal changes in our own body, and things start to descend again. So it's always good, and you can check any literature you want, it's always good to do the work, meaning the pelvic work. Do the work to assure you have a good tone to support the organ to keep it from coming down and descending.